Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, alongside Luke Wyatt. This week's Roundtable Podcast is brought to you by The Wash House, as well as the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland and Belk, John Levin, his company, Wobble Bond Dickinson, Yeaman Packaging Systems as well. We'll get to those sponsors throughout the show. But first, The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and the professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Luke, let's talk a little bit about Texas. We will get into the mailbag. No Chris today. He's got dad duties, but we'll get Chris back there, back in the saddle next week. But Luke, let's start with Texas. I want to get your initial thoughts and give you a chance to break down what you saw on Saturday.
Well, it's like every game we've played. It's one possession game. No, I know I was worried probably more about the Texas game than any of them that we might be a little bit outclassed. I felt like they had the same athletes or even better than Alabama's, but they schemed better. They were more disciplined on defense. And I was right about that. I think that was probably the toughest game. If you ask Coach Kill and Coach Beck, that was the toughest team to try to move the football against that we've played, and probably will be the toughest, I would think, overall. Now, I felt like early in the game, and you and I just talked about this, Billy, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but that call about not having your shoulders turned at the line of scrimmage, that's the most bogus thing I've ever heard. And let me explain to you what I know, because this happened to us one time when we were playing Tennessee in Knoxville. We told the officials before the game, this was when Jerry DiNardo was there, a play that was kind of like, you've seen it where a receiver will line up outside the numbers or act like he's running off the field and then stop. I don't know if you've seen that. It's kind of a deception play like this was. Mm-hmm. And the official said, okay, that's fine. We know you're doing it. Well, when we ran it, they flagged it. And Coach DiNardo at the time and one of our running backs who was involved in the play were like, what's going on? And they said, well, that was what's the word they used? It wasn't deceptive. They said that was what's it called when someone does something that's unethical? They said it was unethical. Well, now look, it's either a rule and you broke and it's a penalty, or it's not. There's not such a thing as an unethical play. And that's basically what this is. They're saying his shoulders had to be square to the line of scrimmage. His feet, but the thing is, his feet never moved. If he'd have moved his feet and turned toward the sideline, then I can understand the penalty. He didn't do that. So therefore, I think it was a bogus call. And it was a huge moment in the game. I was telling my wife, she's at the game with me, I said, that will come back to haunt us before this is over, because this is a game that's so tight that we're going to have to be almost perfect to win it. And I just felt like that was a huge.
Yeah, I'm with you. Letter of the law, right? It's in the rule book. So technically, yes, it should have been flagged. But in the moment, you see all the time, Luke, where you could go back and say, well, in the moment, they didn't call it, but technically that's in the rule book. That could have been called. So it's gone both ways a lot of times. More times than not, that's not called. I understand why it was called. The referee's right there looking at Quincy, and it's in the rule book. It's probably one of those things where the ref in his head thinks it and instinctively calls it. Whereas maybe if Quincy was on the other side, maybe it's not called. But who knows? That was a big moment. I thought there were 2 other big calls in the game, Luke, there early. There was one earlier and then one late. About midway through the second quarter, Nick Rinaldi had a sack on Quinn Ewers to force a punt. And then on the punt, referee said Texas downed it at the 1, but I thought the guy clearly walked into the end zone. Now, again, it's another close call, but that's a field position call that I thought could have gone Vanderbilt's way. That would have been big. And then another call late in the game, the holding call on Junior Sherrill, I thought was atrocious. And maybe this wasn't even late in the game. This was when Pavia got hurt. Pavia had the longest run of the night. It ended up getting called back because of a holding call on Sherrill. I went back and watched that. He was flung down by the Texas defender. Now maybe there was some hand fighting before, and Sark said it at the half, Luke, where Texas got some fortunate calls, especially early. And you could argue, well, those are in the first quarter. But like you just said, this game was tight. And I know it got out of hand a little bit there early, but that field goal from Brock Taylor cut the game back to a comfortable distance for Vanderbilt. And you never know, Luke. I mean, I thought those early calls did make a huge difference in the game.
No, they did. And the only thing I'll push back on a little bit is we ran the same play at Kentucky, and they didn't call it.
Right.
If you look, we ran the exact same thing. Receiver turned his shoulders to the sideline to pretend like they didn't know what was going on, and they didn't call it. So if it's either a rule or it's not a rule, and like you said, by the book, it is a rule, but you can watch every game every week. And in fact, our game with Texas, where holding is a rule. But if you hold on every play like their left guard did, they're not going to call it every time. They're just not going to. So that's the thing to me. If you're holding, you're holding. I don't care if you do it every play. It's kind of like the old Kentucky basketball teams used to put their hands all over you, but they did it consistently. So they only got called for it a third of the time. It's that, to me, that's if you call it right away in that first quarter, those holding penalties that they called, if you noticed, late in the game, they started calling holding on Texas like 3 or 4 consecutive times because they know, look, these guys have been holding all day. We've got to do something here or it's going to be obvious. And I hate it comes down to that. It shouldn't have. But in a game that close, when you're coming down to an onside kick to have a chance to win, that one possession we could have continued means a whole lot.
Yeah, that's what Clark was upset about. He didn't get feedback after the Kentucky game when they ran that. And so from their perspective, they believed that they could do it again and run a play off of it. And what a play call it was off of it. And they did have some early momentum, I thought, offensively on a few of those drives there. Luke and Pavia's tipped interception. Crap happens. I mean, stuff like that happens with quarterbacks all the time. It happened, and Pavia mentioned this. It happened with Ewers twice. Ewers had a couple of passes tipped, and it just happens. And when you're playing a defense like that against Texas, things aren't going to be available, and they weren't. Look, I thought that was a big thing I noticed. Texas's defense was suffocating, and Vanderbilt's on offense, they couldn't do several things they couldn't do the initial run with Pavia or even Alexander. You saw some big runs there from Pavia, but like a big run was maybe 7-8 yards in that game. That's what I'm calling a big run in that game. But I go back to Vanderbilt on defense, Luke, early. After the game, Brian Longwell said they were late getting calls in on defense in the first half at times. And then you look at what Sark was able to do offensively. I thought he had a field day with those quick passes. Ewers was 8 of 8 on the first drive, completed his first 17 passes. And so that, I thought, won the game for Texas in the first quarter. They with them able to get up. But Luke, for Vanderbilt's defense to make those adjustments that they had to make, I thought showed that this defense can be good. They just need to, and I'm not saying they weren't ready to play. Give credit to Texas's offense, but you do go back to what Longwell said. They were a little late getting calls in at times, and that'll affect you. With what Sark was able to do offensively, I thought you can give credit to that first quarter effort for Texas and why they won the game.
I agree with that. And, Billy, a lot of times the first drives are scripted, and it's very hard for a defense to stop. If you notice, and I don't know the numbers, but it seems like we've scored a lot on our first drives, and our opponents, when they get the ball first, have scored, either gotten a field goal or whatever it may be. If we didn't force a turnover, there wasn't a 4 and out or a 3 and out. So, I think that's an advantage. The other thing you mentioned about Texas's defense is completely accurate. Let's take their defense and Alabama's defense. Very similar athletes, but Texas was more gap sound. They didn't get out of their lanes. They were more disciplined than Alabama's defense. That's the only difference in those two, really, is Alabama was just learning that defense. I think Alabama's defense is getting better as time goes on. but we had them with their heads spinning. Now, this weekend in the next football game we're getting ready to play, they've seen everything that Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers are about. That's going to be a thing moving forward in these last 4 games. We really got to watch out for. People have got a lot of film on us now, and so it means that we got to really execute.
Yeah, too many 3rd and longs on offense too. Look, they weren't converting enough early on 1st and 2nd down. They weren't at least getting good enough yardage there. Texas locked down Pavia's legs pretty much all game. The one big run, of course, got called back. Vandy averaged 6 yards to go on 3rd downs on offense. That's not where they're comfortable. As we've talked about, they were 3 of 12 on 3rd downs, Luke, which was a huge stat in the game. I thought another big stat was defensively for Vanderbilt. When they got the turnovers, the offense capitalized. So I thought in a way the defense did their job, not necessarily in the first half, but 3rd quarter, you got into the 4th quarter, you had 4 sacks on Ewers, you had a couple of tipped interceptions. I thought, Luke, I don't know if you agree with this, I thought the defense did just enough to hand it off to the offense to end up potentially winning the game. That Texas defense they were a stone wall at times.
Yeah, and that's that's the difference in playing, having 4 stars and 5 stars, playing a developmental 3 stars. That's going to happen at times. But I will say this: to hold Texas to what, 2 field goals in the second half? I think that's all they got. I don't think that'll happen the rest of the year to Texas. Where we got in trouble was that, again, let's go back to that call, whether it was right or wrong. That possession, instead of going into the half down, you may go into the half only down a field goal or even. And that would be the game again. Instead of having to have the onside kick, that drive we scored on may have won the game for us, or at least put us ahead, and Texas would have had to score. It was a tough assignment. And look, that's the best defense we're going to face. I know Tennessee's got a pretty good defense. South Carolina's got a couple of really good defensive ends, and they're solid. But I just don't think that we'll see anything as good as Texas on defense.
Yeah, you talk about their defensive line. Their linebackers were really good. Their secondary was really, really good as well. Their secondary might have been the best unit on the team. As good as their defensive line was, there were a couple of huge breakups late in the game where one for Skinner, I think it was, on a slant, and then one on Fungi where the ball is there and the catch could have been made, but it was a good physical defensive play by a Texas defensive back. And then you had the ball, the kind of the floater there late to Fungi that did get called. I thought that was a really, really good play call, good decision there.
Right.
But look, Vanderbilt was, for them, there weren't a lot of people that thought this would be a 4-quarter game. No. And it was. And I think I look at that and I go, okay, this is a top 5 team in the country. Some people saying Texas is the best team in the country. Why can't you do that and go beat the next 4 teams on your schedule? I'm not sitting here saying Vanderbilt can. I'm not sitting here saying Vanderbilt's going to go undefeated here, obviously. But why can't Vanderbilt go on the road and beat Auburn? Why can't they go to Baton Rouge and beat LSU? And some people may say, well, the depth will be a problem. I think that could creep up to be a problem. But we've talked about Pavia and his injury status and being banged up. He continues to show up week in, week out. Now, there was a big point in that late 2nd quarter, Luke, where Johnson had to go in. You didn't have Pavia when you probably would have liked to had a touchdown there late before the half. I know you got points, but that's what I'm watching here down the stretch, Luke, Pavia's health. And I know we can brush it off a lot of times, but I am interested to see, does it get worse? Because I don't know. It feels like that same knee is what he's been dealing with. So that's a big thing I'm looking at is how he's feeling.
Well, I think it's how everybody's feeling as well. If you noticed, Langston Patterson was not near as effective. You could see the rust on Langston being out for weeks, and he didn't play near as many snaps as he would normally play. I would love to have had an off week this week. We're playing 4. We played 4, had an off week, but now we're in that 6-game run. We're right in the hardest part of our season, and you just come off a reason why people say, well, why can't we go to Auburn and win? We can, but it's going to be just as tough. I compare this to the Kentucky game. We're coming into a situation where they're playing well at this time. Kentucky was playing pretty good at the time we played them. They had just won at Ole Miss. This is the same type of thing. Auburn just got a huge win at Kentucky, blew them out on their home field, ran for 200, the back ran for 278. So they're feeling really good about themselves right now. It's, games have taken a life of their own from week to week, as we all know. We could win the last four, we could lose the last four. So, that's what's exciting. We've had 8 football games. Every one of them been a one-score game.
It's crazy. Luke, ready for the mailbag?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this mailbag brought to you by Sutherland and Belk, family-owned injury law firm. If your loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. Also, our guest line, Mr. Luke Wyatt, is presented by John Levin, good friend of the show. Wobblebond Dickinson is his company. They thank the student athletes at Vanderbilt for their dedication, effort, and hard work. And also Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. All right, let's kick it off with JD CAV. Not sure how to, some of these names can't pronounce. Does any, that was a joke question. Never mind. Doors on top. Why has this season's success not translated to recruiting? Vanderbilt seems to have a lot of big visits for the Bama and Texas games, but it hasn't translated to commitments. Is it due to lack of NIL? I'm not going to sit here and say it's due to lack of NIL, but Luke, I think you've got to wait and see a little bit here. I know there's some guys that could be committing very soon. Austin Howard is a guy that has decommitted from Mississippi State. Was originally committed to Vanderbilt. I think that's another kid, Vandy fans could keep an eye on. There's some other guys out there. I think here in the next few weeks, you'll probably see some commitments. But are you surprised maybe immediately you have, like after the Bama win, there wasn't a couple or even after Kentucky?
No, I think in the old system, there would have been more. But I think now with NIL involved and you've got, guys, well, I'll see what I can get from Vandy and then I can see what I can get offered on my next visit. Kids will take all the visits they can and kind of feel out the situation. I just think that because of NIL, that's probably the reason why. I still think we'll have a freshman class of around 12, and you'll have about another 8 to 10 portal guys.
It's crazy how much it's changed.
It's flipped. It's because now you really have to kind of wait and see who may leave your program, which gaps you need to fill. So it's kind of hard to commit to certain kids at certain positions because you don't know if you lose 3 defensive linemen and you've already used a bunch of scholarships for freshmen and you don't have any D linemen in those freshmen, then you've got to go out and buy defensive linemen. So it's a tough thing. It's becoming more and more like the NFL.
Just you saying, I'm going to see what I can get here on this visit, and I'm going to go down to Auburn, see what I can get here, go up to Knoxville. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And I know, it's going on, but yeah. Okay. Trail bait. Who would win in a battle between Clark Lee and Hurricane Helene? Follow up. What if it was called Hurricane Lee?
I don't.
That's
yeah. Move on.
We'll skip that one. DTB4. Will every team scheme us the way Ball State did versus our defense and Texas did versus our offense? It's probably a good idea of that. Look, Ball State, I don't know if you could say that. They got their tight ends open. I thought Vanderbilt's defense tightened down a little bit there in the second half. But I will say Texas defensively, what they did. But Luke, the other thing is it's not always easy to go out there and do what Texas did to that offense on Saturday. You can sit here and say, yeah, that's what you want to do. I'm sure that's what Alabama hoped to do. I'm sure that's what just about every team on Vanderbilt's schedule hoped to do. Maybe not Virginia Tech because they really may not have known fully what they were getting. But, after Virginia Tech, it was out there really, So it's not always easy to sit there and say you've got to have the brains of those Texas kids. That's a dangerous combo. Probably the best defense in the country, like you said, Luke, where those are 4- and 5-star kids, but smart kids and disciplined kids. So credit to Kwiatkowski, I think is his name, defensive coordinator there at Texas, had them ready to play. So, yeah, I think what Texas did is they brought their ends out a little bit more, and they read everything pretty well. I mean, there were not a ton of complaints from Texas fans on their defense.
Well, I was talking to one of our former defensive coordinators at Vanderbilt, and I said, "What would you do to contain Pavia?" And he said, "Well, you just got to keep him in the pocket. If you don't let him, I don't care what he does otherwise, but don't let him get running and get in rhythm because he's so dangerous that he can just make ad-lib plays." And that's what Texas did a good job of. They kind of caged him where he didn't have many choices. He either got to run with it or find an open guy. But I'll make a point about Ball State. You know, they're 3-5, and I see they're ranked in one of the bottom 25 teams. But they just beat Northern Illinois, who in turn
I saw that game-winning field goal. Yeah.
So, you know, if you beat Notre Dame on a given Saturday and you can turn around and beat that team, I said it before we played Ball State. I thought their offense was really good and it could score points on anybody. And again, I don't think if you go back and look at the film in the first half of Ball State, Diego didn't run the football himself. They kind of protected Diego as much as they could until the fourth quarter when they saw we needed to score points, and then they cut him loose.
Yeah. All right, we got one from Gary Robertson. How many Commodore players get drafted in the NFL draft? That's a good question. I mean, I think Eli Stowers is going to get drafted. I think Gunnar Hansen will get taken, maybe later. So at least 2. Pavia? I mean, does Pavia get taken? I think that's who knows what happens these last 4 games. Yeah, he's got a shot. I mean, CJ Taylor, you got to imagine gets drafted. So I'd say at least 3. Stowers, Hansen, and CJ Taylor right now is what I'd say. At least 3 and maybe more depending on what happens down the stretch. Yeah,
I think you'll see, I agree with that. And then you add a bunch of free agents. I think there'll be 4 or 5 guys, free agents. And then there's can come back that you're going to get, you know, heck, they may make more money coming back than they would be as a free agent.
Right. I look down the road, Luke. I mean, I'm sure you agree. Brandon Fontenette as a guy that'll get drafted. I'm trying to think of some other guys down the road.
Martell Height.
Yep.
Listen, I'm sorry. I want to mention somebody who has stepped up and played really well, right? And I hope I don't jinx him for this weekend, is Jalen Lackey. That freshman has really played well. Trudell Berry had a huge play, batted down a pass break. We've had some guys getting better in the secondary, and I hope that continues this weekend.
That's a good point. You know, Lackey, we had talked about as a guy that you need to keep an eye on, and he's quietly had to guard some really good receivers at both Alabama and Texas. You know, he was the corner there on Ryan Williams' catch, but he was right there on that. I mean, you go back and watch that. You know, there's not much else he could have done on that play. So, totally agree on those corners. But yeah, obviously a lot of young talent on the defense. We got a couple of Auburn questions from GBarks24. What's the weakness of Auburn's defense that Vanderbilt can attack on Saturday? I haven't looked a ton into that, Luke. I know they've got a good defense. This is a pretty good Auburn defense, but they're young. You know, they're not an experienced defense. I have to go back and look. I don't know if you've looked much into that Auburn defense. I really can't say on that yet.
I've watched 2 complete games of Auburn and highlight reels of the other ones. To me, like you just mentioned, that's a key. The youth, you're hoping they get out of position sometimes because they're still athletically very good. But turnovers have been an issue. And it's kind of their defense, I think, is in the top 30, actually. I'm not sure of that. You might have stats in front of you. But they're sound defensively. Their problem early in the year until this past week was turnovers. They were turning the football over at the worst times. They'd get down the 10-yard line and throw a pick or something. And, you know, for a while, they kept swapping quarterbacks. They now have their quarterback. It's going to be Peyton Thorne, and it's going to be their defense now is not having to defend against a short field.
Yeah, Auburn, as I get these team defense stats.
There's in the nation something. I don't know if it's against the run or against the pass. I'm not sure which.
Let's see.
Maybe points allowed.
Let's see. Auburn. Points allowed. Man, there's a lot of teams. Anyway, I think you're right, Luke. This is statistically a pretty good Auburn defense. So they're allowing 19.5 points per game, which you're right is up there, tops in the country. So yeah, Auburn obviously they've got some talent, they've got some good young players, but they're young, not a ton of experience. So I would say Pavia will have more chances to make plays this week as opposed to the Texas game, just like you said, Luke, out of position. Going back to some of those Virginia Tech plays where Pavia doesn't have a ton of space, but he had just a step on a guy. So I think that's the hope. And I think Vanderbilt's got to win some more of those one-on-one battles on the outside. Skinner had a chance. Fungi had a chance there on a slant as well. I think they'll have more chances to win those as well. So I think they've got to win more of those on Saturday. Another one here. Let's see. From B. Sheridan 15. AJ Newberry's touches have gone down significantly over the last few games. Do you think that's a product of game flow, injury, or something else? That's a good point. He also mentions here had a sizable role through the Kentucky game. Now his snap count is way down. I recall he may have gotten dinged up in the Ball State game. And I think he did. That's an interesting point, Luke, because Newberry, whether it's on an end around or reverse, I like those play designs there with Newberry. But he's also not the feature back. So, he's not going to – I can't remember the last time he got a carry directly from Pavia from the pistol. It's rare. Newberry's kind of a running back / receiver there. He'll line up in the slot, and that tipped pass from Pavia, he sat down in a pocket there, and he was open. He was open on that play. It just got tipped up. So I think maybe they try to use him a little bit differently, maybe in the pass game more, but he's more of kind of a Swiss Army knife with those end arounds, Luke, and those motions, because if you fall asleep on those motions, Newberry will have it. So I don't know. His production maybe has decreased a little bit, but the talent on defense also has increased with your opponent. So maybe that's something within the playbook. You've got to, maybe Newberry doesn't get as many because you're trying to target Stowers a couple more times.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think also Newberry has taken a little bit of the role that Jaden McGowan had on this team last year. And therefore he's not really, like you said, he's not getting the straight handoffs, but they're getting creative with him. I do think this, and you guys will find out today, I guess, that when you talk to Clark about injuries, or is that maybe tomorrow?
That's tomorrow, yeah.
You'll find out more, because I'm not sure we got a lot of guys out this week, but I know we don't have a lot of guys at 100%, because you're playing on their 5th straight game. You got one more next week against South Carolina before they get a break. So we're running on very little threadless tires. Yeah. And this is the reason why it's going to be really tough to win. That's the reason why Auburn's probably a 7-point favorite. They're looking at Vandy's on their 5th straight game. Just came off a heartbreaking loss to one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country.
All right, we got another one. How did Vandy's corners match up with Auburn's receivers? Auburn's receivers aren't phenomenal. They've got a guy by the name of Keandre Lambert-Smith who's really good. Keon Coleman's a freshman. He hasn't done a ton this year. Luke, they've got some capable guys. And they've made some explosive plays. I think they're tops in the SEC in explosive plays. They don't make a ton of them, but when they do, they cash in. And Thorne, when he's not throwing picks, he's cashed in on some big plays. Now that it hasn't been enough for them, just because of the interceptions. I don't know how many interceptions he's thrown this year, but I think on the outside, Vandy's corners just got to keep doing what they've been doing, Luke, and you're not going to win every battle. But like you said, with Jalen Lackey, Martell Height, Trudell Berry, Colby Taylor, is he back? I think this is a game you'd love to have Colby Taylor back. And when he was out last week, and this is nothing against Colby Taylor, I said, well, Texas has phenomenal receivers. This isn't an awful week to have a guy like a Colby Taylor out, because physically, I think I like him in the run game. And even with those tight ends, you would have liked to have Colby Taylor, of course, but this week, rest him up last week, get him ready for this week against an Auburn team where they've got some explosive weapons. It's not Texas, it's not Alabama, but they can make plays if you give them the chance. So I like the match. I like Vandy's DBs on Auburn's receivers. I don't know if you've looked much into those Auburn receivers, Luke, but it's certainly not, they don't have a Ryan Williams or a Ryan Wingo out there.
They haven't stood out, but one thing that one thing that we are forgetting too is this is a mobile quarterback we're playing against. And if they get their running game going, I'm more concerned about getting gashed in the running game than I am the passing game. So their receivers against our defense, I would put that as like the second or third worry. I worry more about slowing down that running game.
All right, Jerry Lawless 3. How much of this football success is sustainable post Pavia and eventually post Kill and Beck? What will it take to keep the floor raised for the program? And do you think they are willing to do it? And do you think they will do it? Luke, you've talked about it. We've mentioned on the podcast before, paying up. If somebody comes calling for Tim, you're going to have to match that at least. And so that's the biggest thing, number one. And I think I look at it, I said this too a couple of podcasts ago. Jerry Kill and Tim Beck, I don't think, wanted to come here for 1 year with Pavia and say, all right, peace out. We're going back to wherever. And this also isn't, this isn't a group of 5 team in a small town. This is an SEC team in Nashville, and they're building something. Clark has built a deep personal connection with these guys, and they are as big of a reason, Kill and Beck, as anybody, as how this is happening right now. But don't forget, defensively, the safeties coach came over. There's a quarterback assistant. I don't know his official title, but Garrett Altman is a really good coach, kind of Beck's right-hand man there. So I think I'm not going to sit here and say they'll be here for the next 7 years, but I think at least 3 years, and then down, maybe that gets to 4, maybe it gets to 5, depending on what happens, the type of talent you can get in. I see Kill and Beck sitting here saying, let's see what we can do with this. Let's see what we can do here. We've got Clark on the defensive side, and maybe Clark down the road passes off the defensive play calling duties, Luke, but I think it's sustainable. And I think it starts with paying up if other schools come calling, but also recruiting. In the portal, evaluating in season, right? You've got to do a lot of that. I'm not saying they're not doing it, because every school has to do that, but NIL, right? Candace Lee and that athletic department has to continue to step up, because the money other SEC schools are paying isn't decreasing anytime soon. So, I think it's sustainable. I've said that before. And I think the city of Nashville is as important as anything. Jerry Kill and Tim Beck, they want to be here. There's a reason they came here for Clark Lee. And so I think it's sustainable, Luke. I know you do too, but I am interested with that question to see what you think about what has to happen for that to sustain.
Before the season started, Jerry Kill, once he got here, did an interview or a podcast where he said for his system to take full effect would take 3 years. So to me, that tells me he is planning on being here at least a couple more years. I don't think Tim Beck's going anywhere if Jerry Kill's here. Keeping Steiner, the strength coach, is obviously got to do that. But no, I think we'll be fine. I don't worry about next year, because every year is different. Every team is different. What Diego Pavia has brought to this team is obvious. But as well as I do, we're a touchdown, maybe 8 points better on defense also. Let me give you one of my worries, and I haven't shared this with Clark, but I'm going to. You remember how upset Clark was with the call. Okay, so we're going back on defense, and Clark's still wearing out the officials. When you're the defensive coordinator and getting our guys ready, that's a huge distraction. When you're having to deal with the officials, plus get the defensive call in, that's where I worry about Clark still being the defensive coordinator. I'm glad he's doing it. Don't get me wrong. There's nobody better to do it. But that's something that kind of went unnoticed Saturday. They scored right after that, I believe, or at least they moved the football right after that, because I think Clark's was still angry, and he's got to get back to the middle, calm down, and get us set. I think that's when we were a little bit scrambling on defense, was right after that, if you go back and watch the film.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And so that is part of the reason why I said, I think Clark wants to pass that off, and he knows that he never wanted to do that. He never wanted to have to get to that point to where he had to be the defensive coordinator. But overall, I mean, there's nobody better for it, like you said, Luke, and it's made such a big difference. Now, I'm with you. I do think there are points in the game where maybe he should, or maybe he is passing it off, to an assistant, whether it's a Steve Gregory or whoever. But that's something that's going to be interesting to monitor, because these are big games, these next 4 games, and they're going to be emotional, and there's going to be bad calls in the games. But I think that's a Jerry Kill. Like, I can see that what you just said, I can see that conversation going on, throughout this week, whether it's Jerry Kill and Clark, because, and I think that's something that has helped Clark, having Jerry Kill in there. I mean, he there's not any situation Kill hasn't seen on a football field, whether it's offense, defense, special teams. I mean, so I think that's going to be interesting to see down the stretch of this season. There's going to be more big calls and emotional games here, especially that last one. NBA door. How concerned should we be about losing our star players to the portal, and are we in a place to keep them? I think this is still a good question. Now, I think they're in a better place to keep players than they were at this point last year. Number one, you didn't have a winning product to sell last year, or towards the end of last year, after last season. So, they've got that. They'll have that. I think they'll make a bowl this year. So you'll have that. You say, hey, come back. Let's get to 8 wins next year. So I think you'll have that to sell. NIL, that's so fluid. Look, I mean, Clark told us that, every year it's going to change. Every year, our amount and what we're able to offer kids will likely change. And a lot of it probably depends on the record that season. But I think they're in a better spot, Luke. And look, they're going to lose players. I don't think there'll be as many guys that exit the team last year. But I don't think Vanderbilt, I mean, if you're Vanderbilt, I don't think you should be worried about losing anybody that could really help you next year. I do think Bryce Cowan, I'm interested in him. He's a really good player, I think. Hasn't gotten to play a ton. So it's guys like that where you look at and you go, okay, it's a crowded room, and that happens everywhere. So I think there's some natural players you might have some concern about, but I wouldn't be worried about anybody that would be a disastrous loss. Like I heard somebody bring up Brandon Fontenette. I don't think he's going anywhere. I know he's from Texas, and he made a ton of plays against Texas, but his relationship with Clark Lee is very deep. So I don't worry about any big time players that could really help Vanderbilt next year leaving.
Well, let's just look at last year. We really only lost one kid who everyone thought this is a terrible loss, and that was London Humphreys. We lost Jaden McGowan and a few others, Will Shepard for other reasons. So that was coming off of a 2-10, a bad year. When you win more games and people are having more fun, and these kids have to be having a blast. They've been in a game. There hasn't been a week that, except for the Georgia State game, where we underachieved big time for the entire week, not just the game, but the entire week was an issue. Except for that blemish, this year has been a success already. Now people say, well, you still got to win that 6th game and get to a bowl. Absolutely. It'll be disappointing if we don't, because we haven't been at 5 wins in this month in I don't know how many years at this point in the season. So, yeah, you got to get one more for sure somewhere in there. But like I said earlier, we could win all 4 and lose all 4. But as far as transfers and stuff like that, you can't worry about it, because everybody's losing players and everybody's bringing in players. Even the best teams have the same issues. So you really can't worry about that at this point. But every year is just going to be it's a fluid situation, man.
Before we wrap up, Luke, I want to ask about, the month of November is typically a tough month for Vanderbilt football teams. I mean, you've seen it where guys, they're beat up, whether it's exams coming up, whatever, what have you. It's going to be a tough month. Vanderbilt, depth wise, they're better, but still probably bottom half, maybe even bottom 4 in the league in terms of the guys you can put out there. But they're well coached. They come every week ready to play. But how physically ready do you believe this team is to not just get one more win, but just survive these last 4 games and get to a point where we're in Tennessee week and we can say Vanderbilt's got a shot to win? Now, I think right now, I believe Vanderbilt's got a shot to win that right now, the way they're playing. But there's a lot that can happen here in the next few weeks. So I'll phrase it that way. In order for Vanderbilt heading into Tennessee to feel really good about winning that game, what has to happen here in the next few weeks, and how good do you feel that physically they can stand the test of time, as I like to say, down the stretch here, and at least get one more, because CJ said that 6th win is the toughest. I mean, it's going to be hard. I'm not saying they don't get it this week, but you're going on the road in the SEC. You never know what's going to happen.
Well, let's step back and look at this a little bit, Billy. I think most fans would say this game coming up or South Carolina is their best chance at that next win. But I don't look at it that way. I think the most important week is that off week, because how they handle the off week, let's just say it doesn't happen and we're 5-5 going into the last 2. You've got a week to step back, get healthy, and approach those last 2 games 100%. So if we don't get it in the next 2 weeks, will I be concerned? Yes, because LSU and Tennessee are both ranked opponents. But the way we've played all year, unless we get a huge rash of injuries, I think we'll be ready to play against LSU and Tennessee. Now, one thing I want to mention, again, I would love to this be an off week, because having to play 6 games in a row, I'm not sure how many teams have done that, maybe 3 or 4 in the SEC. I've seen most people, ideally you want 4, 4, and 4. And it's a physical toll on our kids. And like you said, the depth with our team is not as good as some others. So that could be an issue. But I look at that off week as a key to how we finish those last 2. Are we able to be healthy? And is the mindset where it should be?
And here's why I feel good about the Auburn game, because they went to Lexington after beating Alabama and beat a physical Kentucky defense. Now, Kentucky offense obviously isn't anything to write home about. And Auburn, a team Vanderbilt plays Saturday, just went up to Lexington and beat them, just like Vanderbilt did. But there's proof in the pudding that Vanderbilt can go on the road in the SEC and win, whether it's Kentucky or whether it's LSU, right? I think that simple concept of going on the road and winning in the SEC this year, they've proven they can do it. And so it starts Saturday. It'll be at 11:45 kickoff, Vanderbilt and Auburn on the SEC Network. Luke, I know you're going down to Florida, so safe travels, and I know you'll be watching. And thanks for stepping in. We no Chris this week, but he'll certainly be back next week. But that'll do it for another edition of the Roundtable Podcast on VandySports.com. For Luke Wyatt, I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for checking into another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast.